mix with us going into just driving through the settlement. The BDS is another kind of boycott strategist that we met with, and really looking at ways that organizations can divest. He really, this is Omar Barghouti, he really made the case that this is like South Africa apartheid, and we can really, if we want to make a difference as a church in particular, that we can start kind of looking at the similar strategies that broke down the apartheid in South Africa. These are just some different ways that Kairos has asked that we consider, again, when we go and visit, how we might honor the people that are living there. And I don't think I'm going to go through all of them, but they are on your list. Wadi Fukim, I got an email from Michael Yoshi, who's a former board member of ours, who's very passionate and very involved in his church and his conference in supporting Wadi Fukim, and he's just put this petition online and is asking that he asked me to share it with you and with others as well. So if you would have a chance to go online and want to think about something that you can do, it's a letter to the Lantos Human Rights Commission that says, Friends of Wadi Fukim has submitted a request that the Lantos Human Rights Commission hold a hearing on the human rights violations in Wadi Fukim. Given the urgency of the situation, we request the hearing to be scheduled in the first quarter of 2013. So that's one way, if you're looking for something immediate that you can do when you leave here today, if you would think about going and signing that petition. We also have a community development program in Wadi Fukim helping to create some livelihood projects. We have beekeeping so that the people that are there can continue to be there and be economically supported. So that's something that starting in 2013 we'll also be able to channel donations through the General Board of Global Ministries. David Wildman is a colleague of mine, and he really wanted to be here today, but he is in South Korea today, and he asked me to also point you to the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation, and the occupation.org, which has a lot of information on their website about concrete ways that you can really address this issue with Congress. So that's pretty much where we are, and I don't know if you have questions, or comments.
Thank you.
So, I know I was talking a long time. Do you have questions?
Is there any movement that you know of to stop the United States supplying arms to Israel and $3 billion that's used for their military?
I think if you go to that and the occupation, they would have information about that. They would definitely be able to point you in the right direction. Because they're certainly, and as I mentioned, I think there was an article that went around that the church leaders signed, and they were kind of, I believe that was also part of that. So, yeah, I mean, I really think churches in the U.S., that's something that's so counter to who we are, and it's a really good place to start.
Because I'm trying to figure how can the United States be an honest broker, and they're supplying Israel with weapons of mass destruction. Right. And it causes an imbalance in that region militarily. And I can see Israel saying, well, I have to sit at the table with you, because if you don't do what I say, I'll just bomb you out of existence, which is actually happening now.
Right. Yeah. And the U.S. gets a lot of resistance, I think, about that. I think there's a lot of conflict in our own country about, but again, I agree with you, and I think that the churches need to be part of that.
I have a question. I have never really understood why is the American government so supportive of the Israeli government? I mean, it's one just really begins to believe all kinds of conspiracy theories, because when we think about the recent vote in the United Nations, among 9 countries who were against, basically 2 that really made some difference where only United States and Canada.
That's right.
And so what's the deal? There must be some reasonable explanation to this, or why they just ignore everything that's going on and keep funding, keep supporting, and why the U.S. government? What's the deal with this? Is there some theories for this or explanations?
It may be part of who our constituency is and who's voting and who's putting the
well,
pressure on
it's
the
not
government.
a Jewish country. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
I mean, there are
I had the
Israeli
same
lobbyists
question
around
and-
everything, but it's.
Elliot,
Elliot,
might
come.
be-
Tell me, please. That's a mystery.
I've been around a long time. It's just partly historical. It grows out of the fact of the establishment of Israel on the heels of the Second World War and the Holocaust, the horror of what happened to the Jewish population in Europe, and the desire for a safe homeland for the Jews. Harry Truman was primarily responsible for that happening. The U.S. made a major commitment to it. Harry says, "I am Cyrus," bringing the Jews back to Palestine. And then a big commitment on the part of the U.S. government to use Israel as a balance to some of the concerns about the radical Islamicism in the Middle East. All of these things feed into it. And then there are political factors in terms of who supports the various parties in this country. That fits into all foreign policy, not just into that situation. And it has become the U.S.'s thing. That's what the U.S. government does in that part of the country. So it's not partisan. It's very, very bipartisan policy. Also, in terms of supporting that policy, and then I'll stop, there are many, many, many Christians in this country that believe in the necessity for the reestablishment of Israel before the second coming. And in our own denomination, there is an enormous lobby of people that oppose what Melissa has so carefully and correctly described for these very, very ancient theological perspectives.
So they just identify the Jews with the Israeli government, so whatever is Israeli today is biblical.
To a degree. That's oversimplified.
Yes, I know.
And it's hard to have any conversation about the region without oversimplifying, because it is so complex and the issues are so deep. And I had the same questions. I mean, now I feel like part of it also, I would say, is that many people in the U.S., the filter through our media is so strong, and so people don't even really see both sides. We're only seeing one side very often in our media. So I think that's part of it as well. People don't even know to question it. I didn't even really. I think it was right after 9/11 that I first started realizing that there even was a Palestinian struggle, that there was any human rights violations happening, and that was because I was looking for a peace movement, and that was the only organized group that I had found initially after 9/11, and so it was really interesting, and I started questioning it, but I couldn't find information that wasn't biased, and I didn't know where to look. So it's been 10, 11 years before I saw it.
I hear their opinions from others, human activists, and they consider USA to be using Israel as an excuse to oppress the other because they need the black gold. And it's political, really. But they use the excuse, the biblical excuse, in human history, religion has been one of the major resources to oppress anyone you need to get the resources out.
And it does give the U.S. a way to be in the region and have an ally in the region, which is something that, So, but I do wonder how after this vote and how it became so clear, you have Canada and the U.S. Like, will people in the U.S. start wondering, well, why are we the only ones? I don't know.
Sometimes you talk to people, and I've heard lots of conversations, and some people seem to say that that's almost inevitable for this to be happening. And it goes back to the Bible. Some people refer to the Bible, the scripture, I believe it's in Genesis, where since there would be always be wars between those, two factions. And so I don't know if that's a legitimate answer to say, describing what you mentioned, or whether this is just something that's been accepted over the years for people to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't. It's very hard because you have two groups of people that are, both trying to share space, and you do wonder, well, if the Palestinians then were able to, if there was something that happened that somehow they work out a peace agreement, well, when one side finally has a little bit of leverage, what's going to happen? How are they? I don't know. I mean, we just pray and we do what we can. I mean, to me, one of the biggest issues really was seeing, like, just as the church to say, there are God's children are being hurt, and we need to look at that, and we need to be part of changing that.
It makes me think about when the Israelites were in exile, or and how the Bible records that they were possibly treated, and this seems very similar with the Palestinians now, in that same, well, not in the same land, but in Israel now, and how just to be, I never thought about them being like oppressed in that way and restricted, and that it's almost like a time bomb, because I can imagine that the hostility is just kind of festering and building.
Yeah, when I was going through the checkpoint, I thought, how on earth do people go through this it was so dehumanizing, and to go through it every day if you want to go to work.
Yeah.
What does that do to your soul, and what does it do, how does it, what anger, I don't know, I can't imagine. I just felt so sad being in that place.
And it's sort of, what do you call it? It's not that overt, well, sealing off the door and, changing the restrictions, and no drivers, like no driver privileges, and things like that. It's almost like this country.
Well, it was interesting going around Bethlehem. I mean, at any point they could lock it down.
Yeah.
It was so controlled that any point there were these gates that you could see that they could just say, we're not letting you.
So the hope is that these people will leave. They'll get so fed up and leave. You think?
Perhaps. I mean, that's what I heard specifically in Hebron. But I think in general, I mean, as you're trying to get, if in fact it's about land, then what,
just make it
there's
so
people there, and
miserable.
and you're where you want to be.
How are the Sephardic Jews treated? Are they treated like the Palestinians?
Who?
The
Sephardic Jews, the
Sephardic Jews?
Oh, I actually
didn't see any.
I did not. I don't know if anybody has been there that can speak to that, or I'm sorry. I know there were, and I don't know enough about it to really speak about it, but they it was pointed out to me some of the Bedouin communities that were constantly being pushed and just basically thrown out of wherever they were. And I think at one point they put them in a trailer and put them on a hill somewhere. Like, literally put people in a trailer and said, well, this is your home. And they were like, well, this is really hot. And so they're now living outside. And it's a nomadic community. So it did, I mean, that was another group that I had seen a little bit.
It's interesting, I mean, hearing all that, and also hearing the side of the Israeli government about the desire to have security.
Yeah,
that's always the big thing that is always emphasized. How, I mean, well, I guess I had it, but in your own sense, how did you see the Palestinian people posing that much security? Do they have that ability to really drive Israel away, as it were? I mean, as it were.
I didn't see that, but I mean, you do have, what happened in Gaza where Hamas did. I mean, there are, I can't say that there aren't terrorist elements there, because, but for the most part, what I heard was people were like, we don't have any power. How on earth are we going to do anything, beyond throwing rocks, Somebody, I think it was Sam, who I showed in the beginning, said, you don't throw. There's never been a rebellion where people threw chocolate at the oppressor, And so you just, and it's as somebody that's a peace activist, it's hard for me. I can't say, oh, well, they have the right to do that. But at the same time, it's kind of almost like, well, how much do you take before something has to go back the other way? And so, yeah.
I just want to make a comment. I feel that defining the Palestinians as terrorists is really a crime. Because if there's any terrorists over there, it has to be the state of Israel, the military state. What has been done to the Palestinian people is a crime against humanity, and the things that we have to think about in dealing with healing is the tragedy that the Palestinian people have gone through by being pushed off their lands, bombed with all kinds of bombs that Israel has gotten from America, France, and also from England. And the state of Israel has supported the state of Palestinian. The Palestinian state receives some money from the United States, but it's like $300,000, I think, for the whole country, while Israel gets approximately $3 billion. So I think that, in trying to clarify what's going on over there as you were speaking and you addressed what I feel adequately, the use of the term terrorist for Palestinian is really a misnomer, because if you're being bombed out of your house and you're trying to stop that, I don't think you should be called a terrorist, something else, another name would be better. Maybe a patriot,
Freedom fighter.
Freedom fighter. And I do think that going back to why are people in the U.S. so supportive? I mean, I think partly it is that kind of language that we're not acknowledging Israel as being a terrorist, and we talk about, even if it's, we're so scared of terrorist attacks that, so we hear, well, they need to have this and that because there are terrorist attacks. And so it's the
so
language.
So as you use the word terrorist, everything is
it
justified.
changes.
Right.
Everything is justified. You can do whatever you want. So this
So
is
thank
just
you
terrible.
for that. So,
I just want to ask you, from a peacemaker perspective, Christian perspective, do you think, Christ died on the cross so that everybody could be free from everything you had done? Now you're free because he died on the cross. Do you think that Palestine is being considered slave forever just because of the biblical historic we have, that they are to be the oppressed, and Christ didn't come to free them from whatever they have done in the past?
The United Methodist Church would say no. That is what you're saying. Particularly, you're talking about Palestinian Christians, people that are the original Christians. So it doesn't fit with that theology. Yeah, I mean that was.
God's people. They heard, those mothers heard when they're trying to bomb.
Right, and we're talking, and
all God's people.
Yeah, I think, and our God is a God of love and a God of mercy, and I think that when God's children are hurting on either side, that we're always searching for justice.
And how are the Palestinians identified? I mean, you said they have a card, or they have a license plate, or what? How do you do that?
Yeah, basically based on ID, and it also is determined by which area you live in. So if there were people, for example, Alex, and I'm trying to get it exactly straight, but he was living in Jerusalem, so he's considered a Jerusalemite. And so if he moves out of Jerusalem and doesn't maintain his right, he will lose that status. He will not be able to go back and forth anymore. So one of the things that's happening with people living in Jerusalem, the Jerusalemites, is that their rents are being raised, or they're being restricted in certain ways, again, to push them out, because then they'll lose that status. And then they're in between, they have no status.
Gentrification.
I want to ask this, based upon your historical analogy, which you just gave it to us in reference of location of the Israelis in where they are now after the Second World War. Is there any special reason why they were located in that particular place?
No.
Well, Israel was established after the Second World War because that was Judea and Samaria and Galilee, the places that were the Jewish homeland in biblical terms. Remember, Abraham had lived further west and had further east and had moved into that area. That's what the whole story of the movement of the people. And then after they were in captivity in Egypt, they re-entered that land, and it became theirs. There were some other people living there at the time called the Jebusites, and they were pushed out. And it became, for many years, the homeland of the Jews. It became being caught up in the Middle Ages between the West, which was trying to recapture it with Christianity, and the fact that it was under Muslim control at that time, under Arab control. And for many hundreds of years, there was no Jewish political presence in that part of the world, from the time of the Maccabees until the end of the Second World War. But that's why it's there. It's because it was the Promised Land.
Until then, when did Islam come?
Islam came in the 7th century.
7th century.
I was going to say 1,400 years ago.
No, there, yeah.
Because the reason why I asked that question, we are in the 21st century, and based upon what our sister just told us, I'm wondering that why slavery is still alive in this way. I don't think
You said what?
Why slavery?
More or less buying.
Because I think the Palestinians are just like slaves.
Yeah, I thought the same. It seems like it. Except they're not working.
Yeah, many don't have jobs.
Yeah.
So, but they are, it's a very hard situation. And it's hard for them to get to school or to go. I mean, a lot of it, again, comes back to when you don't have your status as a citizen.
Give anybody power.
So, and the schools are substandard, so you're not accepted to university.
Suppose
You're not
the underdog has become the top dog.
Mm-hmm. And it was hard for me to kind of come to terms with the fact that this came out of the Holocaust. Like as you know, out of it, one ethnic cleansing into another, and it's just so hard. You know, it's just how do you resolve it, and how do you reconcile treating another group of people when this is supposed to be a way of it was redeeming what had I don't know. It was very hard.
It's still war, though.
It's
still
right.
war.
It's war. It's conflict.
The land was conquered, and the people that lost, so they say, are living in these conditions.
Yeah.
Well, it was possible to bring Israel about in 1947 because it had been ruled for so long by the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And the Ottoman Empire had been defeated in World War I and had been broken up. And Palestine existed under the British government for the end of the First World War until the end of the Second World War. It was called the British Mandate period. And it had a British-style government, but not really British-style, but the civil life was controlled by British preoccupation. And then the United Nations actually created the State of Israel. And there was immediately a war, And it was that war that created the incredible numbers of refugees that continue to this very, very day. People who are displaced, living in Jordan and various other parts of the in Lebanon.
Yeah, so you really families are still divided, and this Oh, yes. This is actually Elliot Wright, who is a colleague of mine at the General Board of Global Ministries, and he is, we actually work very closely together in information sharing, so he's mentored me quite a bit, and I'm glad that
Sorry, I was late to this.
That's okay, Elliot. So I'm glad that you're here and able to fill in the parts that I don't know. So
Okay, this is just my opinion by another paper that I'm writing. And if you get to read all of this, the Bible has been written in a way that we refer to the Israel people as the God's chosen people. And in my own opinion, it's an arrogant term that maybe justify everything that we have seen and experienced in Christianity, that sometimes we, even us as a Christian, we consider sometimes to have privilege in God's eyes because we have choose to serve Him, and we don't see His love as it is, that He's the Creator and He doesn't see us in such a exclusivity. And I think that the term choosing people has been misused and very, very, very to the extreme that we can oppress someone and just eliminate that person from the whole context, just because we consider ourselves to be blessed and special people sometimes. That's the way I go.
thank you for sharing.
May I have just one comment to you? Yes, they were chosen. When you read the Genesis 12, and we see that Abraham was chosen to be the blessing to the whole world. That was the initial intention of God, as I understand it, to be a blessing. And
But maybe we can. Christ came for a reason. So it's a new covenant now, and everybody is included in this new covenant, and we stay attached to that term to kind of manipulate every resources and everything that such a group desire to have all of this, and the other needs to be oppressed. Now, then, in my understanding, Christ came for a reason. It is just to be justice and everybody to have the same opportunity to achieve happiness and have access to whatever resources we have in the planet. So, as a Christian, we need to realize that we need to kind of reread this, and maybe the intention that the writer has is because all of these people who had access to read and write, they had the privilege of saying whatever they want to say in the way they intended to. So it's not really God's intention. Maybe that was that intention and that moment in history. I don't know.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
No, I'm glad that Melissa did in fact get here to do this presentation. We do have it taped. We'll make sure it's available up on the NYTS website. We're collecting all this material as part of our year-long process. Thank the Center for Study of Urban Religion and Moses Biney, and as well as the Women's Center here for this year-long process. So we're back again in February.
We're back in February. You have one of these flyers you can pick up on the way out, and it's before you. February 7th with David Little from the Harvard Divinity School. He's the professor of the practice in religion, ethnicity, and international conflict. We also, the other dates are listed here. Save the date for March 7th, April 4th, where Susan Johnson Cook will be coming, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom. And this is all leading up to our Nurturing Peace Conference. So save this date as well, May 22nd through the 25th. And also, I just slipped in front of you our feedback card paper, so we want to definitely have your feedback as well. So thank you, and I hope to see you on February 7th?
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. And also,
Pass them out.
we have these cards to pick up on your